Hello and welcome to the Adventure into Tech podcast with me, Ben Charlton. Here I talk to the leaders behind the tech industry, discovering their adventure into tech and what makes them a success story in their space. A quick one about today's episode. It contains a conversation about mental health and suicide. If you want to avoid this content, it's around the 21-minute mark and lasts for about 6 minutes. Helplines can be found in the show notes. Joining us on today's episode, a guy who spent the last 20 years in technology. He's worked with a multitude of household brands as well as smaller businesses in niche fields. Spent a lot of time working with charitable organisations and done a lot of philanthropic work. Just about to take on his next challenge in the world of consulting. Welcome to the podcast, Dan Bass.
Thanks very much, Ben.
How you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good stuff, good stuff. Well, look, thanks very much for joining us today. Obviously, we wanted to talk through your background, obviously this kind of long history in technology, where that's come from, talk through some thought leadership stuff with you as well. The first thing I wanted to dive into, though, and it's one of the, I think the most interesting things is kind of hailing back to your Compare the Market days. You were there when the Meerkat revolution started. What was that like?
So at that point, I'd been in manufacturing for on and off sort of 10 years or so, and we reached the 2009 financial crisis. I knew I wasn't a big company person, not very formal, liked to be free, close to customer. So I didn't really expect to join an insurance company and be part of anything magical. I heard at the time there was a little jingle of cars falling from the sky and like aggregators as a whole were everywhere. But didn't really think that much about them. Thought I'll probably go and give this job a go for 6 months just to pay the bills and then kind of see what happens after that. And joined on the Monday. The whole Meerkat campaign itself started on the Sunday before that. So at the time there was probably 15 of us in tech, probably another 15 or 20 so in the business. And it just took off like an absolute rocket. And I just hung on for the ride. I think with the growth comes revenue, comes scale, comes opportunity and change. And it was just the right place, right time. Very, very fortunate. Amazing.
And you started there as a developer and then ended up as associate director all those years later. What was that growth? I mean, obviously that's massive amounts of growth. And I kind of looking through your history, it's been every single year you kind of stepped into a new role. What drove that growth within you? Why did you go on that kind of journey?
So it wasn't coming up with a plan, that's for sure. It's just not how I work. I've generally always wanted to be ambitious about making someplace better. I think that's always been something that's part of my DNA. Yeah. I want to do a good job. And I think through the Compare the Market experience, we had lots of different leadership, lots of different styles, different influences from the kind of agile community. It really just helped to shape thinking and grow and develop. So people that wanted to go with it and grow, I wasn't the only one, there was a few of us. Really had the right opportunity to be able to do that.
Obviously, you grew teams whilst you were at Compare the Market pretty heavily. What was the biggest difference you saw in yourself when you were growing within that and kind of getting into that leadership role?
I'm actually working with a charity where I can see this in the people there today. And it's something that I think everyone that moves from an individual contributor role to suddenly having to manage and then manage managers seems to go through. And that is, how do you prioritize work when there's just way too much to do? Yeah. And also, how do you then delegate the things that have to be done when you can't do them as well? So letting go is just really, really hard. If you're used to doing everything yourself and knowing that you reach a high standard by doing that yourself, having to then delegate that onto someone else that maybe you don't think will do it in the same way is really, really tricky to do. It's really, really hard. I think the second thing is that you, like I said, because there's so much going on all the time, you just don't have the cognitive load to stay on top of everything. So you need something else and mechanisms around you to be able to cope with that. And that's where I started to really get introduced and love things like Kanban, even for myself. The Eisenhower matrix of prioritization, all the little models that you see around, but actually they start to look after you. Without those sorts of things, my head was just spinning. I can remember a period of time where I was having headaches every day. I didn't know which way was up. I was going from meeting to meeting to meeting, and I was miserable. And I think actually just breaking through that is the key really for anyone that wants to step up to something bigger and realizes there's just way too much to do.
When I know from personal experience and working with you at the time, but you know, the Compare the Market days, you guys were known as kind of one of the biggest kind of agile houses, certainly in the UK and probably wider than that. What drove that adoption piece initially in-house, and how did you drive that adoption internally?
So at the time, we were probably about 40 or so developers.
Yeah.
We had a new CTO join us, and part of the remit really was they brought in ThoughtWorks to work with us. So ThoughtWorks, a consultancy, very specialized and have some great names behind them of people that have pioneered things in the agile space. But their model was to come in and actually build a product with us, which was 40 developers that were all kind of doing different projects, different times. I can remember sitting at the computer trying to figure out how to do a merge between 3 or 4 different big pieces of code. It just wasn't working, and thinking there's got to be a different way. So we were at a point of scale where things just couldn't grow anymore.
Yeah.
Delivery was failing. And so for them, it was the right opportunity to come in and say, no, this is actually how you should do it. And so just brought in some of the basic principles. So how do you get the customer close to the engineers? How do you empower teams to kind of crack on and do what they know is best? Keeping a team very small, and all the kind of things that come along with that, all the different principles that we know about. For us, that model of come in and show, I was fortunate enough to tech lead that team and partner with the ThoughtWorks tech lead, then sort of just had a cascading effect. I think the stories that came out of that started to realize actually everyone was just like, well, why aren't we all doing it like this? And so this natural sort of osmotic growth happened where people were just wanting to learn and understand more about continuous delivery or code quality or test automation, or whatever those things were. And you just found that breeding everywhere. And actually by doing it that and separating out things, it felt hard at the time because we weren't at the time we weren't necessarily product structured. So forcing that in and forcing that structure, and then actually drove out the right architecture, the right thinking, the right prioritization. And also because then you were looking at lots of small teams, you could then scale that out. And suddenly it went from being able to go to 40 in that model, we could go to 140.
Yeah.
And actually the same model kind of still worked.
And how do you drive, obviously resistance to change is something that every leader has to kind of deal with and work through. Whenever you change anything, that's going to happen. How did you combat that within the adoption piece of the agile kind of that methodological piece within the teams?
So the ThoughtWorks model, which I think worked in that case, was almost come and show.
Yeah.
So we'll deliver something with you.
Yeah.
So they're not trying to convince you and shoehorn you into something. It's not like a consultancy's coming along with a playbook and saying, go and do it like this.
Yeah,
it's actually, let's work with you and we'll figure it out together. And then what they'll do is they'll coach another team at a distance and show them how to do it. And actually, it's just by trying. So yeah, the model that was adopted was very much a come in and we'll show you what to do. So rather than necessarily coming in with a very prescriptive formula and just leaving everyone to get on with it, it was almost just work with the group, show the business how we can do this, show the delivery of value, bring along a couple of your thought leaders and developers, etc. They can then train the trainer. And then it was almost, they were then coaching other people at a distance as well. And so I think through that process, and a key part to any sort of agile development, it's sort of founded on a few things. And one of them is continuous improvement. Everyone wants to come to work to do a good job. Everyone wants to get better. And I think by asking them what they think and how they can make things better, even the people that would say no typically say, oh, I have an idea. And it's great. How do you help them to see that idea through? And we found that very valuable because the experts are the people on the ground. They all tend to know their domain very well and actually have a lot of really good ideas. And so it's just how do we surface that and allow that to kind of take hold? And
how does, so obviously you've implemented principles and kind of methodologies within a larger environment like Compare the Market and BGL. How does that differ then when you look at maybe a Spectrix where the team's slightly more embryonic and kind of earlier stage? What does the difference look like from a kind of an adoption piece look like from a smaller business?
So the key thing that's different is obviously there's less people to convince because there's obviously less people in the mix. But other than that, there's not really that much. When I went to Spectrix, it was a very similar setup as you had 12 to 15 developers, each one running 1 or 2 projects. And they were at a point where they were struggling to figure out how to scale both the architecture, how to deliver value, and scale investment within the team. And so applying the same sort of principles, well, let's think about small team, single backlog. Let's demonstrate how we can get something out the door in the next month and just keep that process going. You actually find the same sort of patterns apply. I think when you can grow something yourself as well and take it from being 20 to 40 to 60, or from 40 to 180, and you're actually helping to hire in the right people, you bring in the right mindset to start with as well. So definitely growing something small and growing it up, you kind of can build it almost blue sky from the ground up, how you'd like to see it.
So is it, in your opinion, is it easier to build a team when you've got a smaller starting point?
Massively, yeah, definitely.
Even without the pulling power of the brand and everything else that goes with kind of a larger business?
So when you have a brand and you have a lot of people that have been there for a while, it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to change their mindset and how work gets done.
Sure.
So when you've got people in an organization, set in a process, used to doing things a certain way, change is hard. The fewer people you have, or the less process you have, actually the easier it is to build something up, for sure.
And is that the same with kind of not just kind of building process and kind of methodologies, but in terms of actually scaling teams and that sort of stuff? Is it easier to do that within a smaller environment where you have the complete control and a lot more kind of hands-onness within that, or is it easier when you've got a larger brand behind you with all the assets that they have?
Politicians' answers, it depends. So I think when you've got someone like a Compare the Market that has the funding, there's obviously more you can spend on things like training, external resources, speakers. We're very privileged to have some of the top names in the industry come and speak with us or run events with us. That sort of stuff invigorates people naturally. When you're a smaller business and you might not have those same benefits, it might be trickier. But actually, on that point, though, is you can bring in the expertise that helps you to drive those things forward.
And one of the things, obviously, your career, you left Compare the Market to go to Spectrix. Then a few years later, you came back to BGL, the parent company of Compare the Market, into a very senior position, kind of associate director level position. What's it like leaving as a leader and coming back in as a leader in an organization where you have so many relationships and you're already part of the furniture, despite the fact you've not been there for 3 or 4 years?
So what was interesting was that I left one part of the business and joined something else where people don't necessarily know as much about you. So they did know of me. But I was fortunate enough to leave very much on good grounds. So I was still in good terms with the CEO, Matthew Donaldson, at the time when I left. I bumped into him in our new London office a month before I was going to come back, and he was happy. We got chatting about that. So it was a very good and a real sign to me to make sure that you maintain your relationships. Don't ever burn bridges, because you never know when you're going to need them again. But I was just very privileged because, like I said before, Compare the Market was such a great opportunity. A brand like that, once in a lifetime thing. So I was grateful to them for that experience. And so left on a high. And their message to me leaving was go and learn some skills. And if you feel like coming back, then that would be great, because we can learn those new skills. And that's sort of what I did, really. So that was really helpful. I also found it interesting that I would walk over and go to a different, because the Compare the Market building was a different building, walk into that building if I had a low day, and everyone would just lift me up. It's like, oh, he's back, and arms around you, and high fives and all that silly things like that. And I was just like, I was really warming. So that was nice. But a whole different set of challenges. So you think you know a business, and then you go and see it from a different perspective, and you realize you don't have a clue. So there's a whole bunch of things I had to learn. The insurance side of the market, or the insurance side of the business, is a very, very different beast to the comparison side. So
something you briefly touched on there about the London shift. In 2015, 2016, Compare the Market took the decision BGL took the decision to open a London-based office. What was the cultural shift like as a business at that point?
So interesting, BGL always shifted. So it continued to innovate itself. It had since the day dot. I think one of the founders, when they first started, was how do we just break into the market? They're the first company to set up a purely over-the-phone insurance business. They set up Compare the Market from scratch. They would go out and buy bike businesses. They were just very good at trying and doing things. So setting up a London office because we needed to scale, and that was kind of the key driver. We were trying to figure out, how do we keep growing this business and tapping into different talent pools? How do we tap into the best? And so London felt like the right opportunity for us to do that, and knew that would come with change. We went into that move with our eyes open. So a good and silly example was that the dress codes were different. Peterborough was still an insurance company, and we had to wear ties. Did you have to come to office when we had to wear ties? And we kind of led a charge to say we need to ditch the ties. And so London was kind of, but London was casual dress, do whatever you want, So there was like, how do we start to marry these things up? And actually the progressive nature sort of just generally flowed back through the rest of the business. And we saw that really well. Did that remind me, did I tell you the story about how Compare the Market came to be? I was saying about that. Is that too much of a non-organic
No,
segue?
No.
Yeah. So BGL was just very good at trying new things, and they ended up building out a bunch of brands that no one's like. BGL itself isn't a household name, but the brands they represent. So they would have had Post Office on their panel, Marks and Spencer's, Barclays, Co-op, and then some of their own brands, Budget Insurance, Dial Direct. So they're building a nice portfolio of insurance brands that the public would know and use. And they're trying to figure out how to get more, how would you say it? So they're trying to figure out how they could sell these brands in different channels. And at the time, so 2005, 2006, there were lots of different aggregators that were coming on. And this seemed like an obvious choice. How do we get our brands onto these aggregators? And the story goes that one of the main competitors to Compare the Market came in to discuss with one of our MDs about how they can get their brands on their panel. And so before Compare the Market was even conceived, apparently the competitor said, well, anyone can set up a new comparison website. Just, I don't know, call it comparethemarket.com. And he walked out the door. And the story goes that the MD actually was on the phone to his IT team before he even got in the taxi to say, has comparethemarket.com taken or not? If it's not taken, let's register it, and that's how we're going to start our business. So it is rumored that the competitor, one of our main competitors to Compare the Market, is the one that actually named us and kind of gave us the idea to go forth
and bought their own biggest competitor in the market.
So yeah.
Obviously, most recently you've been working for BCA, which is owned by the same group as Cinch, second-hand car purchasing platform, which is both owned by Constellation. The last couple of years has been a real kind of, for brands in that world, has been kind of really sort of skyrocket and then kind of peaks and troughs, as it were. What's it been like to go through that wave of emotion of massive highs and then massive lows as kind of things have tailed off?
So one of the things about the automotive industry that I've discovered over the last couple of years is it's very reactive to the market. So as things are changing, it's having to pivot and change and flex. And BCA is no exception. British Car Auctions is not really, again, a household brand, but I was incredibly impressed by how intertwined they are into everything to do with moving cars around. So from Cinch and being able to sell the cars, We Buy Any Car, obviously being able to buy the cars from people, and then everything in between, the dealerships, the part exchanges, etc. But a key part to that is they need to understand how the market is, the different market trends, and then how they react to that and what they need to deliver to make sure they stay effective. And one of the things that I've noticed since I've been there through the high times and the low times is they're exceptional at calling out what their key priorities are and making sure they execute those well. It might change. So it might say in a few months, actually, they realized they could only do 3 things and they wanted to do 4. But they are very, very clear and sharp on that. So from my perspective, that's really helpful to know clearly what you're going after and what you're not. And likewise, then the feedback has been, as we've had to reduce cost bases and numbers and everything that comes with that, being able to play back to the business actually what we can and can't do. And they're very receptive to that. But the economy generally is impacting everyone at the moment. Whether it was chip shortages a couple of years ago, obviously we have Ukraine, now what's happening in Israel, the whole cost of living crisis, inflation. The world's just a very kind of strange place and hard for a lot of people, and automotive is no exception to that. So it's been hit as well. But overall, impressed by how they want to focus on and prioritize and execute exactly the right thing. So I think any business, and I've seen this a lot in successful businesses, and arguably successful businesses, and by what I mean by success is they have huge margins, they're making loads of profit, and they don't actually know what to go after next, and they can't make those the choices. What I've seen either in small companies or companies where their margins are smaller, like BCA, is that you have to be shrewd and you have to make the right decisions and the right choices. Where bigger companies, high margins, they tend to just try and do everything, but they never actually achieve anything in that state.
Cool. We picked out a couple of key highlights from your career there, but I just wanted to understand what sparked that kind of adventure into technology.
So yeah, when I was growing up, I think there's a few things that have interested me. I grew up in South Africa, so I was always exposed to safari parks, the outdoors, the wild. I love nature. So there's like an avenue there, macrobiology or something like that. I quite enjoyed art, although I was never any good at it. I'm not very creative. But the idea of creating art and something like that, I thought maybe architecture. My dad's from the building trade, so maybe that something I could do there. Or I was just always a bit of a nerd. So it was I was computers at home. And I enjoyed technology. I enjoyed seeing how it grew and developed, how the internet was born, all those types of things as well. So it was going to be one of those, really. And I think when it came to it and I started to pursue a career and think about where I wanted my life to go, it felt like that was probably being the one that would pay the bills. I enjoy solving hard problems. I enjoy kind of the idea of creating something. And in a sense, it sort of brings some of those paradigms kind of together. I love watching nature programs and seeing what they're doing on television, or technology can, with AI creating art, there's all sorts of different overlays. But technology is the heart of everything. And I think for me, it was just a really kind of easy choice a natural choice to flow into that direction. And when I first kind of started, it was very much a just get your feet in the door, start somewhere. Doesn't matter what it's like, just learn your craft. And I was fortunate enough to find a company that would allow me to do that. Had a couple of good senior developers in the team that helped to train me up. And then I spent probably the next sort of 7 or 8 years in manufacturing, which was great fun. You get to work with clients, solve real problems, see an actual benefit to what you're doing, meet different people, and that kind of ticked a whole bunch of boxes for me.
So you mentioned really honestly when we spoke off air previously that you'd had some struggles with mental health. Are you kind of okay to talk about that?
Sure.
Perfect. Do you want to just give me a bit of an idea as to kind of what you went through?
Yeah, so I think different people have different struggles with mental health for different reasons. And so I'm not advocating that, my way is the only way, or et cetera, is better or worse. But what I found was that when I've reflected in the recent years on my own condition, I can remember being really struggling with suicidal thoughts from a teenager, like the stresses and pressure of life, exams, or rejection, I don't know, whatever those things were, just always felt very heavy for me. So some people point to like, childhood trauma, what was your mum and dad like? I'm like, well, they're excellent. I grew up in a really lovely home. They're great, still like my best friends. I had good relationships with my brothers. I had a good group of friends. I can't really point to something and say it was that. I think it's just the chemistry of my brain that when I felt overburdened with stress, it felt like the easiest thing to do was just to cut everything and stop. And that sort of thinking has just plagued me, I guess, all through my life. And I think only really in the last few years, as we've talked about it a little bit more, have I realized that that's not how most people operate. I had a breaking point probably, I don't know, a good few years ago now, 6, 7 years, something like that, where I kind of got right to the end of my tether. I felt like life itself was just not worth living. Everything was just really, really bad. And I'd been fantasizing for a while about different places to like where I could end my life. And realized I got into this, I think once you've trodden down a path a few times in your head, when you're quiet, that's naturally where you go back to. And I found myself doing that to a point where I just drove my car one day. It was like a Saturday, and kind of just thought, I'm just not coming home. And I sort of just drove out into the countryside, determined not to, that I've just kind of given up. I'd almost put things in place to kind of say, right, I was at peace with the decision. This is what I was going to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I think coming back from that was very hard. But now I feel like it's given me a platform to say, actually, we do need to talk about it more. I shared recently the struggle with a friend, and he was shocked because he said, well, you're the sort of person you walk into a room and it's like, it just kind of lightens because it's like, oh, great, he's jolly and he's friendly. And actually that's just, what you see here, what's actually going on. It can be a very, very different story. So I've put things in place now. I have people that I share and can talk to if I'm sort of really down the dumps. I'm on meds. I've been to therapy a lot. I enjoy blogging about it and just sharing my experiences. And I want to make sure, and I've had a few people, I've been privileged enough that a few folk that have struggled with it in the last few years have come up and sort of said, I'm struggling, like at a low point, what do I do? And I think for me, that's the value. We need to be there for each other.
Yeah.
For sure.
And when you go through something as kind of intense as those emotions that you're feeling at that time and those thought processes, how do you then continue to be and kind of follow that kind of leadership path within the workplace and kind of from a professional perspective, or does it just all switch off and kind of that's how it works?
I found that my mind works in boxes. So
okay.
Dan at work box, tick, this is the job he is to do. This is who you have to be for that particular scenario. And it might be who is Dan's dad, you know, and it's like, right, you be that for someone else. And I guess, we tend to switch into those different roles. So through leadership, I think the one thing it's driven though and changed for me is a sense of vulnerability. So we're very used to our leaders pushing for, we're all strong, we have tough upper lip, we have the answer to everything. There's a crisis, don't worry, follow me. Where actually you have a look at a lot of great leaders in the past. And there was a change for me, probably, it was a good, again, long time ago, where I went on a leadership course run by, or it was set up by a captain of the SAS, some sort of 60 years ago. And his whole philosophy was really understanding how people feel and really understanding, like properly understanding and getting to grips with them. Because he said, I need to know when I'm walking onto the battlefield with my team that their head's in the right place. Like if it's somewhere else, then it's like, it could be life and death. So for him as a leader, it was very much about expressing how he felt and making sure everyone else felt okay. So if you have like people that are leading SAS teams invested in understanding what's really going on in our minds and opening it and sharing about them, for me, it was like, oh, right, actually I can share. And the more you start to share, the more others do, and they feel comfortable and safe doing it.
Because one of the things that I've always kind of, and as you've rightly said, kind of over the last 4 or 5 years, it's become a lot more kind of socially acceptable for people to talk about this sort of stuff. What would you say is the one piece of advice you'd give to someone that is feeling like this right now?
It's probably the hardest, but it's to share it with someone.
Yeah.
100%. If there's nothing else you do, it's going to speak to someone. It could be a friend, it could be Samaritans. There's a whole bunch of different places that we can get help from, but talk to someone. There's absolutely the most important thing.
Perfect.
The first person I spoke to about it was a doctor who was a locum at the time. He's retired. And I was like, I just need to get this off my chest. And I walked in and he looked like this grumpy old man. And I thought, here's an old school doctor who's going to go, what the hell? And I just said, this is how I feel. And his eyes just widened. He's like, right, okay, I've got you. And it was the best thing for me. He was really, really good.
Amazing. Thanks very much for sharing that, Dan. Helplines and everything and all the numbers will be available at the end of the episode. So we wanted to move on to a section and talk about kind of thought leadership and ironically thought leadership in this, in your case, Dan, is all around leadership specifically. But to tap into the cultural aspects of that and kind of from building teams, how you empower those people and so on. You've grown from leading teams of 5-10 people to 180 to 100 people. How do you grow as a leader as that team size grows?
I think that we're all leaders. So one of the things I'll often ask people when we're talking about driving a change or taking on a new challenge is who thinks they're a leader in the group. And inevitably it's the managers that might put up their hands and everyone else doesn't. But I say, well, no, we're all leaders here. We all have to drive this change, or we have to conquer this thing or deliver this product or hit this target. And so as a team scales and as it grows, for me, it's ensuring that everyone else feels that they're a leader. They're all responsible for that. Doesn't matter if you're 10 people or 100 people or 200 people. Everyone is responsible for helping and they all play their part. I think the things that help me to grow is ensuring that I've got good feedback loops around me. There's some things that I've learned I'm just really not good at. I enjoy solving problems, but I'm very much a big picture person. Don't ask me to look at the details because I'll be bored. If you ask me to look after your spreadsheets, you will be disappointed. So it's making sure you have people around you that can help to do that stuff for you, but also that you're learning about yourself. So if there's extra things that, someone might recommend and say, I've noticed you're quite good at that, or you're not so good in that area. that self-awareness is so important. Something else I'd say is when something scales, you become further and further away from both the customer and the product and the people that are delivering the thing. So it's important to try and figure out mechanisms and ways to stay close to that. And it might be going and spending time with a team, or going visiting a client, or spending time on a phone. But it's so quick and easy to end up almost being, and I know we're not in offices anymore, but like kind of in an office, door shut, doing your job and not actually engaged and connected. I found that quite hard, is actually you have to purposefully go out and make sure you're connecting, because otherwise you make poor decisions and run things through a spreadsheet, and it's just not the best way to make decisions.
Do you know what, that actually resonates really highly with me, because I tend to shut myself off quite a lot, and that's that's really interesting. So obviously there are a host of different leadership styles out there, and kind of, you know, and management styles and everything else, and kind of, you know, everyone's seen, no doubt, the manager versus leader thing. But what is your leadership style?
I think something that we all struggle with a little bit is doubting ourselves. In an extreme case, you call it imposter syndrome. And a part of me is that I doubt myself. I'm probably also a bit of a people pleaser. So the idea of servant leadership like ticks those boxes straight away, because it's like, I'm not ruling over you. I'm here to make your life better and serve you. And also, I don't believe I could do a great job anyway, so therefore could you just take it and do a good job? I jest, but I think there's probably a little bit of that, where that's kind of grown from my style of I care, and the things that make me get out of bed in the morning. It used to be technology and solving the problems, but actually it's seeing people grow and develop around you. And that's bigger than maybe the short-term business goal, because that goal will come and go. It's bigger than that product you're going to release, because that product might die or fail. But actually the people that are growing through those experiences that are under your care, and what they can achieve, and particularly what they can achieve together as a high-performing team, where a team is greater than the sum of its parts, is just that's the most fulfilling thing I think you can find. And so as a leader, what drives me to lead isn't to tell people what to do or to tell them how to do it. It's to see that environment, that dynamic, and see them just do amazing as a group.
And how do you, so obviously getting the best out of the people that are under your care, how do you empower your leaders to get the most out of their teams?
So transition, I've found that when you manage managers, is actually they need a coach, they need mentoring, they need help and support. And also you need to align on your styles. It's no good if you have a manager reporting to you as a bit of a dictator and just demands to have it done a certain way, which if the whole organization is like that, that's fine, that's a style. But actually if you're trying to set a style, the kind of styles need to line up. And so if you find someone that wants to empower people, wants to feel like they're getting the most out of people, they need to make sure that they have the tools necessary to do that, both their kind of hard people skills and also like the actual tools at their disposal that they can use. So being a coach, being a mentor, being there for them and clearing the path, I think is the most helpful way. I've found when I've had people that don't necessarily align, it just jars the whole group. So like with any team, you kind of have to deal with that, either with feedback or helping them to find something else that's more suited to their style, etc.
Who's the best leader you've ever worked with, and why?
Can I have more than one?
No.
So there's actually a manager that I hired, well, I helped to hire because I was on the hiring committee at Compare the Market, interestingly enough. And I wasn't quite sure why I needed a manager, because I was reporting into the CTO at the time. And so we ended up hiring a chap called Steve Woodford, who joined. He came from a consultancy background, and I just have learned so much from him. After him being my manager, I actually moved into a different role within Compare the Market, moved out of technology, or moved out of engineering and into product. He was still a friend and a mentor to me. I would go and run things by him, like presentations to the board, etc. And then after I left, we kind of just kept in touch. And when I knew that I was coming back to work in Peterborough locally again, moving away from London, he offered me the role back into BGL as well, and so continued that friendship. And we still catch up now for dinner. And I think the reason is that I think sometimes you just look for people that you know you. I get a sense that Steve probably knows me better than I know myself. So he places me into situations where he knows I'll thrive and do well and grow, and also really help the business to succeed as well. And I think I've found that when I've had good leaders around me like that, and there's a few, they all know the people very well, and they know how to get the best out of them, but in what positions they need to play them on the pitch. It's no good, putting you in the wrong place where you're just going to burn and wondering why you succeeded in one place and why you're failing now without actually knowing the person. So, that's probably why I appreciate Steve the most.
And you spoke about kind of putting people in the wrong positions and that sort of stuff. What's the biggest mistake you've made as a leader?
There's been lots. I think every day is a mistake. A couple of general things that I catch myself doing, which I'm sort of aware of. So one is I would expect everyone to be in the same place as me and they're thinking on a particular area. So I might arrive and say, right, yeah, I'm assuming everyone here knows that test automation is great. We're just going to do it. And actually half of the people don't think it's a good idea. So it could be something like that. I think a mistake I've made sometimes is to go against my gut instinct and follow maybe what advice would come from either HR or a business when I felt like it was probably the wrong thing to do. And I've done that a couple of times and regretted it, where people have been involved and probably been hurt as a result. And they've been very gracious to me. But I think there's definitely a learning about just because the book says X, Y, Z, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's right for people. It might be a policy that's set for a reason. It's almost look for the spirit of the law rather than following it. And I've found myself in those situations a few times.
So as a leader within both small and larger organisational units, how do you ensure that you create and foster a culture that ensures people from all different backgrounds feel empowered and feel like they have a place within that?
I think one of the things that's common and we've come to realize is that you don't want everyone at the table to be thinking in the same way as you. You want diversity in thought. I recognize my privilege in many ways. So one example is, like I said, compare the market, right place, right time, serendipitous. And it was just one of those things. Another one is kind of growing up in a place where I had access to high education, a loving family, secure financially. So there's a whole bunch of these privileges that come along. And for me, diversity in thinking is a key aspect, but actually it's about how do you leverage your privilege and the position that you have as a leader to benefit those around you. And Compare the Market was a great place for us to try this out, where we were at a point where you can imagine we were scaling quick. The business wanted to grow. We wanted to take over and really be in the number one comparison site for the UK consumer. And we were thinking about different ways to hire people because we were leaning quite heavily on the contract market. And one area that we really wanted to explore was graduates. And so we could have gone down the route and said, actually, we're just going to tap into all the top universities and roll out a nice graduate program for all these top university students, which are probably all kind of similar to maybe the people that we have. But actually, how do we look at grad programs? But actually, how do we also look at ways that we can bring in diverse thinking and really tap into underrepresented areas within technology? And so I happened to bump into someone who was just starting a boot camp called Makers 12 years ago. And was very impressed about their approach, not just to training and coaching people into how you enter software development, but actually about the talent pool that they sort of fish in. It was very, very diverse. And so from that, we were able to get, mothers that were looking to come back to work, massive untapped potential there. We were looking at people from underrepresented backgrounds that might be ethnically, people that were looking to second careers. And so that just became an amazing opportunity for us to help people overcome some of the challenges and barriers to entry when coming into a career in technology. And I was fortunate enough to speak to a lady called Fatima yesterday, who was wishing me farewell. And she was just saying, look, this apprenticeship program that we put in place in BCA using Makers and the apprenticeship schemes changed her life. And, it's really given them a reason to think differently about themselves and the financial stability for their families, etc. So there's so many, and I think in this country we're very privileged with the apprenticeship schemes that we have, that companies are paying into, really should have a responsibility to tap into and make use of that and make sure that we're helping people.
And it's not just inside work that inside the workplace, I should say, that you've obviously looked at kind of privilege and kind of how that sort of works, and also kind of helping people from other backgrounds. I wanted to ask you and kind of get you to talk a little bit about Sports Connections Foundation. Are you able to give me a bit of an idea of what that looks like, what you've been involved in, and what you're doing with those guys?
Yeah, sure. That's great. Thank you. So Sports Connection Foundation was started by a chap called Junior McDougall. He was an ex-pro footballer. Very openly, he was born in America, but kind of grew up near me up in Cambridgeshire, broken home, didn't really have that much, but actually found football as a way to lift himself out of his situation. And so that became his passion about how do I help others to follow that path. And has set up a very nice structure where they will go and engage with schools across the country. They've reached out to over 500,000 kids across the UK with something called Pro Kick Challenge, where they teach kids about the importance of fitness, wellness, global citizenship, and play some games with them. And really then use that as an opportunity to engage with the school and figure out what vulnerable kids there are and who they could actually help. So that's kind of the beginning of the funnel. The next stage in that is then they set up youth cafes and youth programs where they're running sporting events or youth events in different locations. And so the youth workers there, again, will be very closely tied to the schools, but also just looking out for who are the kids that need support. They might be on an autistic spectrum, they might come from a broken family, they might be just struggling with some stuff. And it's both the kind of short-term need, but also how do you get alongside them and train them? So one of the youth workers is actually spending time with 6 or 7 individuals at the moment that are struggling in various aspects, helping them with things like career decisions, interview techniques. One of them wants to go and train to be a football ref.
Yeah.
So it's actually how do they then work alongside those individuals? And then a stream alongside that as well is they do Sporting Wishes, which is basically tapping into the network that Junior and the team have about how they provide Sporting Wishes for children with life-limiting illnesses. And the final bit they do, which kind of comes alongside the global citizenship piece, is to run youth programs in West Africa as well. So a real emphasis and a drive really to say, how do you target and help and support children in their formative years? Because those are the years that kind of ground the foundation for them and give them the skills they need. Yeah. For me, it kind of ticks all the boxes. I know Junior personally, know the people that work in the charity. They work locally in our community, and obviously that's where I've got lots of connections from businesses as well to help us to invest and to kind of give to that cause. It's just having a real impact. And I think now more than ever, like we need it. I've seen children that go through hardships, and it kind of can wreck the start of their life and then impact the rest of their life. And it's actually, if you can help them through that period, then it actually sets them up to be more stable. Knowing Junior, he asked me just in terms of knowing my experience within running teams, business processes, how you set up structures, funding, funnels, donor relationships, all those sorts of things as well, just for some help. So I actually joined as a trustee a few years ago and just spent time with them, both in terms of getting alongside individuals that might be struggling within the charity. Maybe they're struggling with the scale or the organization, but also raising funds for them as well. So I did my first half marathon a few months ago.
Even with that clicky ankle.
Even with the clicky foot. Yeah, I know. It was clicking the whole way. But yeah, anything just to kind of raise awareness for the cause, really. And I think being a trustee comes with a lot of responsibility. We need to make sure that by hook or crook, the charity can keep running.
Sure.
And we have a responsibility to do that. So for us, it's just making sure we've got the right governance and structure around them that they've given their best chance to succeed and thrive.
Amazing. As we kind of wrap things up, at the end of every episode, we have a couple of quickfire questions that we like to kind of put to everyone. There's a couple that are more generic and a couple that are more personal to you. So I want to dive straight into this. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
So I can still remember the conversation. There was a serial entrepreneur I met when I was at university, and they effectively said, making sure you keep your stakeholders informed of everything that you're doing. And the example, they get told a little story and said that, imagine there's Jack, sorry, Jack, if this isn't at you, but Jack gets given a job and he does absolutely nothing for it. He gets given 2 weeks to do this job, and he will go and bunk off and play golf, and then take his wife out for lunch, and then he'll ring his boss and just give him a 5-minute brief. And then the next day he will wake up late, he might do a little bit on his computer, might go and chat with a few people about it, but you'll ring up his boss every day. And the idea being that because he keeps his boss engaged the whole way through, he gets halfway through the second week and he says, I'm going to need an extension by another week, and his boss is like, yeah, it's fine, you've just kept me in the loop, he knows what's going on. And because of that transparency, his boss ends up feeling engaged, happy with the outcome, knows what's going on. And it's definitely not saying that you can be lazy. That's not where that is going at all. But it's the importance of making sure that you regularly keep your stakeholders and your customers, whatever, engaged in your process. And then the other example was Fred. Sorry, Fred, not you. Fred is very diligent and he works very, very hard. So given the same task, he will go away and be super studious, working into the evenings, but his boss never hears from him. And so by the end of the 2 weeks, he ends up producing something. It was nothing really what the boss actually wanted. He's not really that happy with Fred, but Fred feels like he's put all his effort in. And so Fred might have put his effort in, but actually he didn't keep him engaged. And I've just learned that very early on. So whenever I'm presenting anything to an exec board or anything like that, I'll go and chat with them and just say, so what are you expecting? And I'll do a very first, I think it's called the shitty first draft, and go sit in front and say, this is just kind of my first draft. Could you just give me some feedback? And so literally by the time they're seeing it, they feel like they've helped you to build it. So they're already on board. And I've just found that to be incredibly valuable. And when I see people try the other way, where they're like, I know better, I need to prove myself. So I lock themselves in a cupboard and do it all themselves, they come out and just disappoint everyone. So yeah, that's just stuck with me time and time again.
Really useful. South Africa or living in the UK?
South African weather and safari parks. UK economy, safety.
In Cambridgeshire.
Cambridgeshire. Well, yeah, if you say like Cambridge or Durban, I'd say Cambridge.
Okay.
100%.
Okay, fine. But with the weather and the safari parks somewhere near the backs.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
If you could completely change your profession and do something else, what would you do?
I saw this on your note and I was like, I genuinely can't think of anything. If I had the self-motivation, I would have been an entrepreneur. But then it's like,
okay.
And there's a group called Flip Dish.
Okay.
I don't know if
I know
you know them. So I thought of that idea like 8 years ago. We knew how to build it. We knew, I had everything. I had a client. Like I like the idea was like we could do this, and I just didn't do anything with the idea.
Business in the box.
So it's like ideas. Who cares about your ideas if you're not going to do anything with them? No, but honestly, I generally don't know. I really enjoy kind of where I'm at and what I'm doing. So I don't think there's anything else I'd want to change.
And what or who inspires you the most, and why?
So I think I find inspiration from my faith. I said I'm a Christian, and there's a lot that kind of drives out of that. I think I have lots of inspiration from people around me. So my wife, my parents, some of my friends, some of my bosses. I love following thought leaders, even if they're completely crazy, the Elon Musk of this world, just to see, just different insights and stuff. So you get inspiration from everywhere. But I'm very lucky to have the people that I do in my life.
Amazing. Something a bit more lighthearted. Who's your favourite Meerkat?
So there is a rock kind of heavy metal Meerkat called Vasily. He's like, it's either rocking or drinking beer, and he's like, just sounds like my sort of Meerkat.
And the final question for you, and I think I know the answer to this now. If you had unlimited funds and resources, what one venture would you create, and what problem would it solve? And it can't be Flip Dish.
Flip Dish. I mean, you were the trivial stuff. You'd say, solving world hunger and peace and all those kind of things. Of course, you'd want to have a go at tackling that in some way or making a dent. Here's a very trivial, stupid thing, but it's been like a pebble in my shoe for the last few years. So teams are structured in a way where you want to see them through different lenses. So one is like you want to see an org chart because you want to know who your hiring managers are, but that kind of stays within a company. You also want to see how like the team topology work that's going on, how a little team, which might be a few businesses, it might be a few departments, but they all kind of swarm around an idea to solve a problem. There's no way to have the data list in a spreadsheet and press a button and generate different views of that at once, which sounds like a completely stupid little thing, but it's a coding thing I do on my side. I'm determined to solve that problem because we look out there, there's no software that does it. You can either do it in an org chart or something else. But for me, the visual is so important.
Yeah.
Like who's working on that thing and how do you do that thing? And you can't actually see it. And it's a real pain. I know it probably seems like really trivial and pointless, but I was just like, for me, it's just like, we should be able to solve that little problem. Because I get asked, the amount of times I get asked for org charts and like org designs and all that kind of stuff, and just be able to have the data there and press a button and get it. And then manually dragging stuff around org charts and PowerPoints are pain.
Luckily, working in consulting, that's going to get so much less, right?
Hopefully.
Well, look, Dan, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Really good to see you. Once again, thanks for sharing.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ben.
Brilliant.
Good to be here.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Adventure into Tech podcast. Please like, share and subscribe and let us know what you thought in the comments.